They think you're planning revenge. They think you're sitting in silence, waiting to strike. But what they don't understand is that you've already let go. You're not sharpening knives. You're not rehearsing speeches. You're not chasing closure. You've outgrown the war they started. This isn't about revenge. This is the quiet return of balance. This is karma, dressed in the robes of justice, walking without sound, speaking without words. And while they sleep peacefully in the lie they built, life is writing their sentence behind the scenes. No noise, no warning, only consequences. Because some lessons aren't taught, they're lived. And this time, they will be the ones who learn. They say you're holding a grudge, that you haven't moved on. But if they stood still long enough, if they listened beneath the silence they left behind, they'd know the truth. What they see as bitterness is simply balance returning home. You didn't choose rage, you chose restraint. And that restraint, they'll never understand it, because people like them expect chaos. They feed off of it. They mistake your silence for weakness, your distance for defeat. But what they missed, what they always miss, is that your quiet wasn't a retreat. It was a decision to stop bleeding for people who would never offer you a bandage. You didn't want revenge, you wanted peace. But peace doesn't always arrive with flowers and forgiveness. Sometimes it walks in wearing armor and justice. Sometimes it doesn't say anything at all, it just watches. Watches as the same pain they handed out returns to them, not because you threw it back, but because life simply does not lose track of debts. There's a line between vengeance and equilibrium, a fine, invisible thread that separates the one who strikes out of anger and the one who steps back out of wisdom. You've chosen the latter, not because you're afraid to fight, but because you're done playing games with people who only know how to win by wounding others. They didn't see the nights you wrestled with your own heart, begging it not to hate. They'll never know the weight it took to stand tall when every part of you wanted to shatter. And in their story, you'll always be the villain, because your healing exposed their harm. But healing doesn't make you cruel. It makes you clear. And you've realized now that not every battle deserves your sword. Some only deserve your absence. And when you walked away, it wasn't to punish them. It was to preserve yourself. That's what they can't comprehend. Because in their world, everything is a competition. Every silence is an insult. Every boundary is a betrayal. But you weren't trying to hurt them. You were trying to stop them from hurting you. And that's what justice looks like sometimes. Not a dramatic ending, not a slam door or shouted truth. Just a quiet refusal to let them write another page in your story. Let them misunderstand it. Let them twist it. Because the truth is, your absence has a weight they can't carry. They thought you were cold. You were calm. They thought you were passive. You were patient. And patience, real patience, is the most underestimated form of strength there is. It says, I will not react. I will not entertain chaos. I will not reduce myself to match the damage you do. You've made peace with not proving your side, with not defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And that isn't revenge. It's power wrapped in silence. You don't need to chase payback. That's the lie they tell. The myth that strength lies in retaliation, in showing up with fire just to prove you've survived the burn. But the truth is simpler, colder, and far more powerful. You let the universe keep the score, because it always does. not with fury, with precision. They think they've escaped the consequences, that just because you didn't explode, they've won. But what they don't see, what they never see, is that you've handed the burden over to something far greater than you. You're not interested in balancing the scales with your own hands. You're not sculpting revenge. You're stepping aside and letting life deliver what it always delivers. Consequences, dressed in silence, delivered in time. You didn't walk away because you were done. You walked away because you understood the assignment was no longer yours. And now the test begins. Not for you, for them. They think they passed by breaking you. But karma doesn't need a witness to begin its work. It doesn't knock. It enters, quietly, steadily, without a single warning shot. It doesn't matter how they paint the past. It doesn't matter what mask they wear to the world. There's no version of the truth that erases what they did. Life doesn't need your permission to recall what they sowed. And it doesn't forget. They taught the lesson, now they must sit through the exam. This isn't about punishment. It's about reflection. It's about facing the mirror without you in the room. That's the part that stings. Not your silence, not your absence. The mirror, the one they avoided for so long because your presence helped them ignore it. But now, there's no one left to blame. No one left to distract them from themselves. That's what karma does. It doesn't come with noise. It comes with the quiet moments. The ones they thought they craved. The ones they now dread. It's in the echoes of their own choices. In the replaying of words they can't take back. In the regret that creeps in when the applause fades. And the truth remains. You don't need to watch. You don't need to hope. You don't even need to know when it happens. That's the beauty of it. It's not yours to orchestrate. It's not yours to control. You just let go and trust. Because when you walk in truth, in calm, in alignment with your own integrity, the world around you begins to correct itself. You don't need to expose anyone. Time will. You don't need to seek revenge. Consequences come wrapped in silence, and when they arrive, they fit perfectly. They may not recognize it for what it is at first. They'll call it bad luck, misfortune, coincidence. But deep down, somewhere in the space where honesty still whispers, they'll know. They'll remember. And they'll feel it exactly the way they gave it. When you heal, they tremble. There's something unnerving about seeing someone you tried to break become stronger than ever. It rattles the very foundation of the story they told themselves. That you were fragile, that your silence meant surrender, that you needed them more than they ever needed you. But healing doesn't just restore what was lost, it replaces what was broken with something they can't touch anymore. You were never weak, you were wounded, and that's a difference they never understood. They confused your care for dependency, your vulnerability for naivety. They thought your forgiveness was permission. But when you began to rise, quietly, steadily, without announcement, it sent a chill through the very people who believed you'd stay beneath them forever. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't need an audience. It begins in the unseen corners, where you start to reclaim yourself in pieces, where the voice they tried to silence begins to return, where your mind stops replaying the moments they convinced you were your fault. It's subtle, but powerful, because every step you take back toward your peace sends a message they can't unhear, the life you're building without them. It's louder than any confrontation, and that silence becomes the thunder that follows every lie they told. They'll smile when they see you, maybe even pretend nothing happened, but inside they'll flinch. Because deep down, they know the version of you they tried to erase is not only alive, it's evolved. They hadn't seen it like that. They didn't expect that. They expected ruin. They expected you to stay frozen in the chapter they left you in. But you didn't just turn the page, you rewrote the story. You stopped waiting for an apology and started giving yourself closure. You stopped asking why and started asking what now. And that shift, it's not just healing, it's transformation. What terrifies them most isn't that you moved on, it's that you did it without looking back, without seeking revenge, without needing them to admit they were wrong. That kind of growth speaks louder than blame, because it says, I no longer need you to acknowledge what you did in order to be free from it. They feel it now, not in punishment, but in presence. The presence of your strength, the presence of your boundaries, the presence of someone who once would have shrunk for their comfort, now standing without apology. It disturbs them because it reflects the truth they buried, the truth that the damage they caused didn't destroy you, it revealed you. And now, your peace is loud, your stillness is threatening, because it means they have no more power, and without power, their identity crumbles. That's what your healing does. It disarms them. It corners them with the weight of their own actions, not through revenge, through evolution. Through the quiet power of someone who chose to rise instead of retaliate. Karma never asks for directions. There is a strange and steady rhythm to justice, one that moves beneath the surface, unseen, unannounced, yet always exact. It doesn't chase, it doesn't argue, and it doesn't ask for permission. Karma has no need for roadmaps, because it always knows the way. It doesn't call ahead, it doesn't knock twice, and it never asks you if now is a good time. People think because nothing happened in the moment, nothing ever will. They assume silence means escape, that if life didn't react instantly, the page has turned. But justice has patience most people don't. It doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive on your behalf. It waits, timelessly, until the moment is right. And when it moves with a precision that no one can see coming. You didn't need to become the judge. You didn't need to plan out their downfall or craft a speech to expose them. You simply stepped out of the way. That was all it took, because karma doesn't need assistance. It works best when you're not looking. While they laugh, while they deny, while they convince themselves they got away clean. That's when it begins. It doesn't show up in dramatic scenes. It arrives in the small details, the missed opportunities, the empty relationships, the restless nights. The weight of their own choices begins to echo. You won't be there to witness it, and you don't have to be. That's the part they never understand. They thought your absence was retreat. They didn't realize it was the first sign that balance was on its way. There's a moment, often quiet and unremarkable, when it clicks for them. Not publicly, not with some grand admission, but alone, in the space between distractions, when there's nothing left to blame and no one left to manipulate. That's when karma speaks, not with fury, but with truth, not with punishment, but with reflection. You never had to yell, you never had to strike back, because the weight of what they did was always going to return. not because you demanded it, but because life, in its own way, always brings things back full circle. What you send out doesn't disappear, it collects interest. And the longer it's delayed, the deeper it sinks when it arrives. And while they scramble to make sense of why things keep slipping through their fingers, you're already long gone. Not bitter, not watching, just building, healing, growing. They won't know how to name what they feel, but they'll feel it. That cold tap on the shoulder, that unexplained sense of unrest, the delayed storm that finally catches up. It wasn't your anger that brought it to their door. It was their own actions, returning in the quiet. Karma doesn't need a destination. It only needs time. And time, no matter how far they run, always finds them. Dignified distance is power. There comes a moment when you stop trying to explain yourself, when you stop pleading to be understood, when you realize that peace doesn't require anyone else's permission, and that's the moment everything changes. Not in noise, but in silence. You don't slam the door, you simply close it, and lock it gently behind you. What they called revenge was never that. It was space, distance, boundaries drawn not in anger but in self-respect. You weren't punishing them, you were protecting yourself. Because at some point you realized that staying close to those who repeatedly hurt you wasn't strength, it was self-abandonment. And leaving wasn't weakness, it was a declaration. I will no longer bleed in places that refuse to heal. They didn't expect you to walk away. Not really. They expected you to stay, to argue, to prove something. But you didn't. You left without theatrics, without threats, just the quiet decision to no longer shrink for people who couldn't grow. That kind of exit, the one with no drama, no justification, is what unsettles them most. Because there's a difference between cutting someone off and rising beyond their reach. When you elevate, you don't have to scream. Your absence echoes in every corner they used to control. It fills the silence with accountability, with the question they can't shake. What did I do to lose someone who used to love me that deeply? They will call you cold. They will call you heartless. They will say you changed, and they're right. You did. But not in the way they tell it. You didn't grow bitter. You grew wiser. You didn't become distant. You became discerning. And you didn't stop loving. You just stopped sacrificing yourself for people who saw your heart as a convenience. Distance isn't always about leaving someone behind. Sometimes it's about choosing yourself first, not out of ego, but out of survival. You realize that your peace is not negotiable, that your soul is not a battlefield for someone else's war. And once that truth landed in your chest, there was no going back. The beauty of dignified distance is that it doesn't demand anything. It doesn't seek revenge or recognition. It simply exists. A line that says, I am no longer available for the chaos you bring. And the longer you stand in that quiet strength, the clearer it becomes. They were never ready for someone like you. Not because you were too much, but because you finally realized you were enough. They'll feel the shift long after you've stopped thinking about them. In the moments they reach for you and realize you're no longer within reach. Not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. They will feel your absence as power, as a consequence, as clarity. Because the strongest statement you'll ever make is not one of anger, but of distance rooted in self-worth, not punishment, but presence. Your own, finally returned to where it always belonged, with you.